Alright, let's see here. Hi guys. Hi Gaibia. Don't.
Name of the collective is the Collective Cadet.
Cadet?
Yeah, the Collective Cadet.
Siela. Oh, speaking of the devil. How we doing, Siela?
Good.
New cut, huh? Okay. I think after my parents meets.
You want to swap chairs?
Yeah, what's up?
Mine's on cushion now.
Papa, you good?
Ready to turn off the ringtone?
Yeah, thank you. Please turn off your ringtone. Привет, папа.
Привет,
Rear guard. Что, мы готовы?
Мы готовы.
Alright, so lectures in English.
Yeah.
For those of you
Talk
who,
English.
for those of you who struggle a bit with English, tough luck.
Sorry.
But we'll try to make it simple. We'll try to make it understandable. This is our fourth lecture about the history of the English language.
And the last one, so.
Oh yeah, and the last lecture. So
Yeah.
thank you for all who came for the last one. It was more people than we had in any previous lecture. Okay, so previously we talked about how the Anglo-Saxons arrived in England in the 5th century and brought with them all the Germanic words that make up 26% of our vocabulary and most of the basic words we use today. So for example, almost everything I just said was in Germanic language words that shifted over time. Then we talked about how William the Conqueror invaded and conquered England, and an event that made French the language of the English nobility, and brought in most of the French words that make up 29% of the modern English vocabulary. The Norman conquest would also bring most of the Latin and Greek words that make up 29% and 6% of English words respectively.
Keep in mind that that percentage is based on the actual words, not how frequently they're used.
Yeah.
As Fanny said, I said 26%, that's used a lot more than the rest.
And the last 10% come from proper nouns in other languages. And this graph is mostly true as early as like the 15th century. Sure, there's like a lot of, well, not a few words that are brought in the next 500 years, but this is mostly true like 700 years ago. But this is how English looks in the early 15th century. This is an excerpt from the Canterbury Tales.
Which we looked at last time.
Yeah. Does this look like modern English?
Not really.
No, exactly. Moreover, it doesn't sound like modern English. Here's the phonetic spelling of this passage, which goes something like, Wan that April with the shures, the drochte of March, hath persed to the rota, and bathed every vine in switch liquor, of switch vertu, and gendred is the floor. This sounds like something out of Lord of the Rings. This does not sound like English. So how in the world does English go from this to this without adding barely any new vocabulary to the language? And the answer mostly comes for one single conflict called the 100 Years' War. For this, we skip ahead from William the Conqueror's 1066 invasion of England to the year 1307. A bunch of stuff happens in these 250 years. There's a bunch of crusades, and Richard de Lionhout is around at this time, and the story of Robin Hood emerges. But unfortunately, this long period is mostly irrelevant to the history of the English language. So again, we jump to the year 1307. King Edward I of England, William the Conqueror's great-great-great-great-great-grandson, is on his deathbed, and he's a bit of a pickle. Edward was, to put it simply, a legend of English history. Have you ever wondered who founded the House of Commons? Does how council decides all the laws and political actions of the British government? Edward I. He realized that some of the merchants in England were richer than his earls and barons and dukes, and thus invited some of them into Parliament. Have you ever wondered why the heir to the English throne is called the Prince of Wales? That's because Edward I conquered Wales in the first half of his reign. But what Edward I is most famous for, and what there's a chance you might know him for, is being the English king that tried to conquer Scotland. Have any of you ever seen the movie Braveheart? Really? No? Oh, unfortunately. Oh, we have one person, yeah. So, Braveheart is set during Edward I's reign, and here's how he's depicted in that movie. Edward I is most commonly known as Edward Longshanks because he had really long legs, but his other nickname was the Hammer of the Scots. Contrary to what the movie suggests, Edward I is actually really good at fighting Scottish people. He only ever lost one battle as king, and it is exactly that battle that is depicted in Braveheart. So Hollywood gives him a bad reputation. But Edward I did successfully manage to conquer, control Scotland for a time. To really show you what type of guy Edward I was, in 1304 he arrived at the last place that resisted him, a place called Stirling Castle, and put it under siege. The siege stretched out for months, and eventually Edward I got impatient and built the biggest trebuchet ever made, the Werewolf. Needless to say, when the Scots saw Edward build what was the 14th century equivalent of a nuclear bomb outside their castle, they immediately surrendered. But before Edward accepted their surrender, he decided to try out the Werewolf and launched a few dozen stones at the castle walls. And so Edward managed to conquer and during his lifetime consolidate Scotland as part of the English crown. During Edward's occupation of Scotland, we actually see a minor influence on English in the form of a few vocab words that entered the language. Most of these are pretty predictable, especially something like loch or plaid, but some of these are more surprising, like golf. Before I researched this lecture, I didn't know that golf was a Scottish word. But Edward knew that his control of Scotland was tenuous at best. And in fact, on his deathbed, Edward requested that instead of being buried normally, his flesh was to be boiled off his corpse and his bones carried into battle in future Scottish campaigns. So eventually he was aware of the fact that England's control of Scotland would not come without another fight. Edward I's son, Edward II, he was kind of a iffy guy. He was nothing like his father. He wasn't a great conqueror or a great military leader, really that powerful at all. And Edward I understood that for his son to have any chance on holding on to Scotland, he needed to set him up with the most robust position possible. Now here's a little more backstory. The historical ally of Scotland and his people were the French. England and France had become main rivals during the 2 centuries after William the Conqueror's conquest. William's Normandy and the Plantagenet, Anjou and Aquitaine, the Plantagenets were a house that ruled England for 200 years. Basically reduced France to half its size, causing almost a century of warfare that eventually ended in the French reconquering almost all of their territories. Except for Gascony. Have any of you here ever read Three Musketeers? Or at least heard of it? Three Musketeers. Yeah, okay. The main character of that novel, D'Artagnan, is from Gascony, so if you ever wonder where that is, there you go. By this point, England and France were each other's arch nemesis, and the French took basically any opportunity to try to weaken England, which included helping the Scots. Edward understood that for his that for his son to have any chance at retaining Scotland, he would need to give the French some reason not to aid the Scots against Prince Edward. And so, when Prince Edward lay on his deathbed, again in 1307, he arranged for Prince Edward to marry Princess Isabella of France, the 4th child and only daughter of Philip IV of France. So, why am I telling you any of this? Why does any of this context matter, and why am I talking about this one king and this one marriage in some random year 1307? Well, it's because this one single marriage acts as a butterfly effect for the next 700 years of English history. This marriage is the reason why England has no possessions on the European continent. It's the reason why England would eventually form an empire that would conquer a quarter of the globe. And it's the reason why English today is spoken across the entire world, right? It's why we're speaking right now, and it's why it's the largest second language spoken in the world. That's because that single marriage led to a conflict known as the 100 Years' War. Edward II did not last long. His new French wife, Isabella, is often called the first femme fatale in history. She was called the she-wolf of France, because throughout Edward's entire reign, she was basically trying to get him off the throne, and also was cheating on him with another man. Isabella eventually succeeded in her efforts and managed to imprison and kill Edward in 1327. The story goes that she shoved a red-hot poker up his anus. And so the crown was inherited by their son, Edward III. Really original name, huh? Meanwhile, the French were having issues of their own. Isabella's father, Philip IV, had 3 sons, all of whom died in relatively quick succession. And so when Charles IV, the 3rd son of Philip IV, died in 1328, the French throne should have passed to Philip's closest descendant, Isabella. But there's a bit of a iffy thing with French succession law. Women could not be queens in France. There's something known as Salic law, the French law of inheritance. But many European political figures, they found that a little complicated because sometimes you end up with no sons and just daughters. And so they figured out, what if we make an exception? What if people can inherit through women? So for example, Isabella can't inherit the throne, but her son Edward III can. And this would have been the logical way to inherit the crown. But the French obviously did not want an Englishman as their king, and so instead they chose Philip VI of Valois, who was Charles IV's cousin and Philip IV's nephew. And Edward III was fine with this arrangement. He was fine with one kingdom for a little bit, until in 1337, Philip VI tried to revoke Edward's last territory of Gascony. And so Edward III pressed his claim and began the 100 Years' War. Things went really well for Edward at first. He won two quite famous battles early on in the war, namely the Battle of Crécy in 1346, where he won against an army of friends that was thrice his size, and the Battle of Poitiers in 1356, where his son, Edward the Black Prince, managed to capture the French king, John II. This capture was followed by the Treaty of Bretigny between King Edward and King John II, where Edward regained a huge chunk of southern French territory. In the south of France, and this kind of led to a little bit of a standstill in the war. Edward III is actually a really cool king. He's considered one of the best kings in English history. He's kind of like a real-life King Arthur. And he's responsible for the Order of the Garter, which is the UK's top knightly order, and it still appears on the British coat of arms. And he also split the Parliament into the House of Commons and the House of Lords, because previously it was just they all sat together. And because there were like dukes who thought that the the merchants were unworthy of these positions, and merchants who thought that the dukes were all snobs, they decided, you know what, it's time to separate them. And Edward III did that. After Bretigny, the war came to a standstill in a proxy conflict in Spain, and the death of Edward the Black Prince. They really love their Edwards. I think this is like, what, the fourth one? But yeah, and so the war stopped for like 60 years. Until Edward III's great-grandson, Henry V, decided to try to invade France again in the year 1415. He would win one of, if not the most famous battle in English medieval history, known as the Battle of Agincourt. A victory that killed almost a third of all French nobles and won Henry half of France. After the battle, Henry signed the Treaty of Troyes with King Charles VI of France, a treaty that disinherited Charles' sole son and heir, and stipulated that once Charles died, the French throne would pass to Henry and his lineage. Charles was clinically insane. He once attacked his own entourage outside of the French city of Le Mans, which some of you might be familiar with for other reasons, namely the race that happens there every year. Sometimes he spent hours running around naked around his castle, and he had metal rods under his clothes because he thought that he would break, because he thought he was made of glass. This, combined with the fact that Charles was 51 in 1420, while Henry V was a sprightly 34, made people believe that Charles would die first, and then Henry would secure the French crown, and the war would end for good. But both Charles and Henry died 2 years after the treaty, and ironically, Henry died first, and Charles died 2 months later, leaving their claims to their respective sons. Charles, also confusingly named Charles and Henry, namely Charles VII and Henry VI. It's very confusing. Medieval kings really liked naming their sons after themselves. Charles VII was 19 years old, while Henry VI was only 10 months. But the English had much more territory and a much better position, and a better military. So the war again came to a standstill. The English likely would have won when Henry VI grew up, but a little someone, a very special historical figure, ended up turning that around. And it's probably the second figure in our series of lectures that you guys should know after Julius Caesar, and that little someone is called Joan of Arc. Basically, while the English were besieging the city of Orleans in 1329, 16-year-old Joan of Arc showed up to Charles VII's court and said that she had a mission from God to relieve the siege of Orleans and crown Charles VII as king. And to prove that this was a divine message, because in the medieval era, if you take a message from a demon, you're gonna have bad luck, or at least that's what they thought. And so he decided, you know what, we're gonna prove this by sending you to Orleans and seeing if you win the siege. And she did in fact win the siege, and this led to them being able to go up north to the city of Reims, and that's where there's a cathedral, and every single French king must be crowned there. So to legitimize Charles, they had to get him crowned there. Although Joan of Arc would be infamously captured and burned at the stake only 2 years after the coronation, her victory at Orleans and the coronation acted as the turning point in the Hundred Years' War. And by 1453, Charles VII had reversed all of Henry's gains and kicked the English out of France, winning the Hundred Years' War. How does any of this matter? Why did I just talk about all of this random war in the middle of the 15th century where a bunch of people died and there's Joan of Arc and yada yada yada? Why does this matter to English? Well, as you can guess, 116 years of war did not make the English and French exactly the best of friends, which was very heavily reflected in how England treated the French language. For example, in 1362, after a bunch of English patriots claimed that the French were trying to destroy the English language, King Edward allowed for Parliament to be opened in English for the first time in 300 years, making it the official language of the country. Throughout the next century, French was viewed as the icky, posh language of the nobility, and more French-speaking nobles started to speak English. Finally, Edward III's grandson, Henry IV, would become the first English king in 300 years to speak English as his first language. The Hundred Years' War created a great divide between England and France, both through the fact that England was now no longer controlled by any French lands, and the fact that the two countries had, through their warring, created the first inklings of a cultural and national rivalry. This rivalry meant that England became separated from France more than ever before, and this separation would lead to a process known as the Great Vowel Shift.
Thank you, Ivan.
Mm-hmm.
I can from here. The Great Vowel Shift. The Great Vowel Shift is perhaps the fastest sound change that has ever happened in any language. Vowel shifts happen all the time. That's when the vowels that we typically use in our language change to different ones. We can see evidence of vowel shifts across all languages. They have happened everywhere. It's really easy to see them in the way languages are written, because when we start writing, when we start speaking differently, our writing system frequently doesn't catch up. Right? Because our language changes all the time, but writing something we make up once, and then once every few centuries we might change the way we write, but that's about it. And you can very much tell that in English we never write the same way we speak. It's always very different, and part of the reason for that is general sound change that happens across all languages, but another part of the reason is the 100 Years' War, which has sped up sound change incredibly so. Before I talk about the Great Vowel Shift, can anybody tell me what a vowel is? Yes?
A-E-I-O-U.
Those are examples of vowels, and those are perfect examples of vowels. Who can tell me how vowels are different from a consonant? And it's okay if you don't know. Around half the time I ask this question, people immediately know the answer, and around half the time they don't know the answer, so that's okay. Sometimes people
You can make the sound as long as you like, right? You can continue making the sound indefinitely.
That's a good answer. I like that answer because it's intuitive, but unfortunately, that's not how we usually define vowels and consonants. Usually we define a vowel as a sound where we don't use our teeth or our lips or our tongue in any way to abstract the sound. For example, ah, I'm not using any of my abstraction mechanisms. While in s, I'm using my teeth and I'm using my tongue to make the air flow in a very particular way. Because of this distinction, consonants are usually the key things that we look for when we hear a word. They usually tell us what the word is about to mean. There are some languages in which they don't write the vowels at all, or at least very frequently. They can get away with just writing the consonants to get the gist across. We can see this, for example, in the way that some English words sound. For example, one of my favorite English words, abrupt. It sounds abrupt. And it's no accident that that word has this exact collection of sounds. It's the b, r, p, t sounds that end immediately. They're called the stop sounds, b, p, t, and because of the high abundance of them, we associate the word abrupt, the sound of this word, with the actual meaning of it, as opposed to gradual, which doesn't have those sounds, so it sounds more gradual. The consonants are the most important thing when it comes to the meaning of the word, which is why vowels have a lot more freedom to change. I know that the word spectrum is a word that's used a lot by everyone to mean everything, but vowels are one of those things that exist on the spectrum. It looks something like this. If you're wondering what these symbols mean, those are the vowels that currently exist in English. You listed the 6 vowel letters that we have, but as you know, those letters usually have different sounds. For example, the A in the word rat and the word rate makes different sounds. So this is rat, and the one in rate is actually not on here. It's these two sounds combined together. So obviously, you can also hypothetically have a vowel that's right in between these two, right over here. But we don't generally consider that as a vowel in the English language. If you say this vowel in a sentence, we'll probably assume that you mean one of these 3 and then carry on. It'll sound like you have an accent, but it will not change the meaning of the words that you're saying. I'll explain how the vowels are arranged over here. This dimension is whether the vowel is produced in the front of the mouth or in the back of the mouth. For example, this over here is E, the frontmost vowel. And then over there you have U and you have O, which are the backmost vowels. And then this dimension is how open our mouth is. So E and U, it's not open at all. And then E or O, it's open quite a lot. This over here is a fun little vowel called the schwa. It's my favorite one. And the reason for that is because it's right in the middle. And there is something that we observe with languages. Usually when one of the most common examples of vowel change that has happened in English is when the unstressed vowels all converge over here. For example, in the word, I don't know, August, which one of those is stressed? Which one do we put more emphasis on? The first or the second one?
First.
Yeah. So the first one is this fun vowel over here. The second one, as you can tell by the spelling, used to be an U sound. But it has migrated over here because we don't really need to emphasize that one. Because once again, consonants are the sounds that matter, and vowels are the sounds that just make speaking a whole lot easier. There is a third dimension to the vowels that we have. We have front, back, we have up, down, and we also have roundness. For example, these two are in the same place. The only difference between them is that one of them we round our lips, the other one we do not. There exist other languages that have other dimensions for vowels. For example, there exist languages that have voiceless vowels, ones where you don't use the vocal cords to produce them, like, if you could even hear that. There exist languages that have nasalized vowels, where you use your nose, like the French have that, which we do not, thankfully. We took a lot from the French in terms of vowels, but we didn't take that. So the great vowel shift was this giant migration of vowels that has happened across all words. Before this change, words were mostly spelled the same way they were pronounced. But over the course of like 100 years, which is not a lot when it comes to sound evolution, they have all migrated this way. The R vowel has changed into an R vowel. The R vowel has changed into the E vowel, and so on. That's alright. The E vowel over here, this used to be beta, pronounced exactly as it's spelled, turned into beta. As you notice, the E used to be pronounced. It wasn't always a silent E. And the reason it went silent is not because of the great vowel shift. It actually has happened after. But before it went silent, it was very crucial in how the vowels have changed. The difference, as it comes to the linguistics portion of these lectures, if you read the previous ones, you would notice that in the past I would talk about a particular language family, like the Celtic languages, the Germanic languages, or the French language, and then talk about how it influenced English. This is going to be the first time when we can really look in depth at how English influenced itself, how English has changed on its own. And to do that, we'll talk about sound change. There exist 4 principles of sound change. Because sounds in languages change all the time, but there are particular rules to how it happens. The first rule is that sound change has no memory. That means that if a sound change has happened once in English, it doesn't mean that it will ever have to happen again. For example, another change that has happened around this time that doesn't have to do with vowels, because again, while it was the great vowel shift, vowels weren't the only thing changing, is the N in a lot of words changed to an M sound. For example, in the word like impossible, we used to pronounce it as impossible. We should later change it into impossible because it's easier to say. And the reason it's easier to say is because the E sound and the P sound are both pronounced at the very front of our mouth. The M is also pronounced there, but the N is a little further back. And it was very difficult to jump from front to back and back to front. So we changed the N into the M in there. And the reason I say that this has no memory is because later the word input got added into the language. Input is a more modern word. But it didn't follow the same sound change, because just because the sound change has happened once, doesn't mean it will happen again. A lot of things have changed besides just this one thing. So it doesn't make sense to do this change anymore in our language. So we haven't done that yet. And this is actually a really great way to tell whether a word beginning with imp or imp was added to English during modern English or during Middle English. If it was during Middle English, then the N would have changed to an M. If it was during modern, it would not have. So, for example, the word improvisation was during Middle English. Words like, I don't know, the word ampersand also follow the same thing. Because this also used to be an N. But again, it's changed because we have a front vowel and a front consonant. So N% became M%. Right, so rule number one is there is no memory. Then we have rule number two, is that sound change ignores grammar. That means that we do not care whether a word is a adjective or a noun or a verb. If the sound change happens in one kind of word, it can happen across all kinds of words, which sort of leads us to the third rule, which is that there are no exceptions. These rules seem like they're kind of similar, but they mean slightly different things. No exceptions means that you can't have a particular one specific word where all other words the sound has changed. In this one, it has not. That doesn't happen. You can have restrictions for how sounds change. For example, one thing that happened over here with the great vowel shift is we had these two words, beat and beta. And what happened is we had the same sound over here, but in one of the words it underwent a change, in another one it did not. Because this turned into, this stayed as bit, and this turned from beta into beta, before this E got dropped later on in the history of English. There is a reason why that happened, and the reason for that is because of this fun little thing called bracketing that we do. Whenever we see a word, we immediately split it into parts, and we don't always do it correctly. For example, a fun example that I like using, that does not particularly pertain to sound change, but it's still interesting, is the word hamburger. Where does the word hamburger come from? Hamburg, the city of Hamburg, in Germany, which is not where they invented the Hamburg, but where they invented the predecessor of hamburger, which later in America turned into the hamburger as we know it. But that's not how we usually look at the word. We usually look at it and we see the word ham and we see the word burger. And you're like, well, hamburgers are not made out of ham. That's so silly. We should just rename it to burger, which is exactly how this process happened, and it happens across all words. Another thing that has happened is the word orange used to be pronounced as norange. Does anybody have a guess where the N went? It's a difficult thing to guess. Because when people would say orange, they would mishear that as an orange. So over time, we have re-bracketed this as and orange, like that. There are a few other words that have underwent the same change, and there is actually, I'm pretty sure there's also one word that went the opposite way, but I can't remember what it is. But bracketing is something that we do, and it's something that happens with words bit and bitter. Because bit, we have just one, we have one bit. That's it, that's the entire word. But bitter, we split it into two different things, and you think of them separately. So even though there is a T in both of them, in this word, in bitter, we don't think of this T as part of this vowel E. They are two separate things, they are different syllables. So this one underwent a change of E into I, where it became bitter. And that's why this E was important before it went silent, because this E is the reason a lot of these words have undergone the change while the others have not.
Another example is the word helicopter. Like just top of your head, how does helicopter split?
Helicopter.
Yep, but no, it's helicopter,
Because helico means helix, and pter means flight.
like a pterodactyl.
Yeah, like pterodactyl.
And so
except without the
instead of, saying, I don't know, rafflepter, we say rafflecopter. And so, yeah. A good example of this, I think, is in French. Je m'appelle, je m'appelle. At first, that's my name is, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. Je, I, ma, is, appelle, name, my name is. It was je m'appelle. And now it's je m'appelle, and the M is added to it. Yeah.
Yeah. That is another interesting. That's one of the ways language changes, and it has happened a lot in English. It actually pertains to the second rule, because when I said that grammar doesn't matter, I lied a little bit. It matters in exactly one instance, and that's word boundaries. Sometimes we are aware of the fact that there is a word boundary, so we will, for example, not let a sound change happen there, even if it normally would. Other times, we would only let a sound change happen at a word boundary. So, for example, when you take that, also a change that happened around this time. That is, it combines into one word, but this sound, because this is a z sound, you don't say that is, you say that is. This sound changes into an S sound, like that. This is the proper notation. Z changes into an S. And this is a change that usually doesn't happen. Usually in English, S changes into a Z sound. But this is a one exception because of it's a word boundary. And the last rule, my favorite one, is that sound change is inevitable. You can try as hard as you can, you will never be able to prevent sound change from happening in your language. You are changing the way you speak subconsciously. You subconsciously pronounce sounds slightly differently than you were taught. And future generations will subconsciously pronounce them even more different. You can sometimes see, aha, you're pronouncing it wrong, and try to correct yourself or correct others, but that's not going to help you, ever. So these are the 4 rules of sound change. And we already talked about some mechanisms for sound change. There is many different reasons sound change happens. Sometimes we do it because, as I mentioned earlier, it's difficult for our tongue to jump all over our mouth. So we make the sounds more similar. That's called assimilation. Sometimes we do the opposite, where some words sound a little bit like they have too many similar sounds, so we try to make them more distinct so that people can have an easier time understanding us. That's called dissimilation. But with the great vowel shift, unlike most other vowel shifts, which are not that great, is that the sound changes haven't happened for a particular efficiency reason, like efficiency of understanding or efficiency of preserving energy, not having our tongue jump around. It happened because of our attitude to the French. And if you ask, is it a positive attitude or a negative attitude, the answer is we do not know. There is 2 main theories for how the great vowel shift happened. Theory number 1 is because English people wanted to sound more like the French. But the thing is that the French have left. So they can't remember what the language sounds like, so they try to fake it until they make it, and they don't do it quite very well. So instead of the vowel sounding more like the French, they go into a different direction. That's one theory. The other theory is because they wanted to sound less like the French. So they have not intentionally changed every single sound they make, because again, you can't control sound change, but they subconsciously wanted to speak differently than the French did. So we don't know whether it's because they liked the French or they hated the French.
But either way, it's because of the 100 Years' War that they
It's
had
because
this
of the
separation.
100 Years' War, where one, the attitude towards the French changed, and two, the French have also physically left.
One example of this phenomenon is how do you pronounce this word?
There exist two answers, and both of them are correct. Someone say it out loud.
Croissant.
Croissant, okay. Ever hear people say croissant? Yeah, like the fake overly French pronunciation. I heard Ivan say it whenever he orders a croissant. That's not exactly a French pronunciation. That's not how the French say it. That's how Americans typically think the French would say it. And when they want to sound more French, that's what they go for. But don't be quick to judge these people, because there also there also exists another word like parmesan. There is only one way to pronounce that in English. Everybody calls it parmesan. But the reason we call it that, because that's not how it's pronounced in Italian. It's because people want to make this word more Italian, so they added the j sound, which did not exist in the Italian word originally. And we all say it like that.
Do all people say Parmesan?
I've never heard anybody say it any differently.
You're just using it as an example.
How do you say it?
Parmesan.
Parmesan. See?
Yeah.
So you over French the words, but you under Italian the words, and that's okay, because most people do it the opposite.
Yeah.
All right, how are we doing on time? I think it's time for you to take over.
Yeah,
before
yeah. Okay, so what we just talked about, or what Robyn just talked about, was what happened after the French were left. And England had a system of 3 languages in the Middle English era. They had Middle English, they had French, and they had Latin. And so now French has essentially disappeared. But
That system used to be called, is officially called trilingualism, and after French disappeared, it was called bilingualism.
what's your
Hmm?
computer died.
My computer died, that's
Sorry,
tragic.
yeah. Not died. Okay. So yeah, we have Middle English and Latin left. And I think a lot of you may know that Latin was, for a while, the language of like scholarly stuff. All the scientific papers, all the theological writings were all written in Latin. And why are we not talking Latin right now? Why is this educational, scholarly lecture not being delivered in Latin? Well, the answer lies mostly in the actions of one man, who you may know very, very well. This is Henry VIII. Henry VIII is mostly known for his 6 wives, and 2 of them, their relationship matters a lot to our story, and that's Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn. Henry was married to Catherine of Aragon for more than 20 years, and they were actually quite happily married. Henry VIII was not that bad of a guy before the 6 wives thing. But eventually they're, yeah, well, you never know. Maybe he was
Everyone
already
has
tired.
their flaws.
Yeah, yeah. You know, he got a little old, he got a little tired, and became not exactly the most moral character. But yeah, before the relationship became strained, over those 20 years, Catherine failed to produce a son. And England had quite recently been ravaged by a deadly civil war that stemmed from a succession crisis. And when you end up with no son, as we saw with the 100 Years' War, you get a succession crisis. And so Henry VIII was deathly afraid of not having a son in the end. And he began looking for other options, namely a young noblewoman named Anne Boleyn, who he began to fall for and was keen to make his queen. In the medieval and early modern era, you can't actually get divorced. It was against Christian canon law, but you could do something called annulment. You call up a bishop, or if you're a king, you call up the Pope. The Pope. And you ask him to get your marriage annulled, which basically means, oh yeah, marriage never happened. Normally what they'd say is we're too closely related, which was very often true. Henry tried to get the marriage annulled, but the Pope was being held hostage by the Holy Roman Emperor, Charles V, who was consequently Catherine of Aragon's brother. And so the Pope essentially had no choice, and wow, that was a very long delay. The Pope had essentially no choice and said that he can't really get his marriage annulled. And Henry tried like 5 times to get his marriage annulled, but eventually got tired in 1534, he decided, you know what, we're breaking from the Catholic Church and we're starting our own church called the Church of England, or the Anglican Church, with himself as its official head. How humble. Beginning the English Reformation. Over the course of the next century, anything associated with the papacy, including the language of Latin, would be reviled by English scholars and theologians, and so that the Bible now had to be read out in English, and thus translated into English, forcing translators to become creative. These scholars would coin new words like atonement, scapegoat, Passover, and mercy, and directly translate phrases that like the powers that be and signs of the times, which is the exact same language structure as sentence structure as Hebrew. And yeah, this is when Latin begins to get phased out of the English language. Now turn it over to Robyn for that one.
Despite the fact that Latin was very much removed from there, nobody spoke Latin anymore. People stopped speaking Latin everywhere over time, which was quite tragic. But it actually makes it fun to study it now because nobody actually speaks it. But the thing about Latin is just like the French language, a lot of people really, really liked it, especially scholars. I've mentioned earlier that the reason English writing system, or all writing systems for that matter, are not entirely consistent with the way we speak is because the way we speak constantly changes. It can't not change. And the writing system that we made up, because all writing systems are made up to most accurately represent the sounds that we make, we need time to catch up because as sound changes consistently, if we changed our writing as consistently, it would be impossible to read anything. We need a system. But that's not the only reason that writing has become more difficult than it should be. Another reason is because people wanted their writing, the way they write words, to be more cool. So they would take silent letters and throw them into words. For example, the word be in subtle, or doubt, or plumber. It didn't exist in the past. People chose to add it in, scholars mostly, because they wanted English to look more like Latin. It's generally impressive how much language change leads from the fact that people either really like a particular language or really dislike a particular language, as we can see here. French continue to influence, both French and Latin actually continue to influence languages, simply because Latin was considered scholarly and wise, and French was considered, the best word I can think of is sexy. French is very frequently described as a sexy language, and part of the reason is because French was one of the most powerful countries in Europe for a very long time until very recently. But another part of the reason why specifically we English speakers think of that is because French used to be the language spoken by the parliament. It was the cool language, and we borrowed a lot of words from French. Even to this day, whenever people are writing and they want to make their writing appear more sophisticated, they throw in words of French origin. We talked about this during the first lecture, I think.
Yeah,
So
but if you want to test if somebody's like trying to convince you something is trying to sound too pretentious, you just check how much French words, like what percentage of French of their like text is French words. If it's too much, then don't listen.
yeah, if it's more than 20% of the words are French in origin, then the person who is talking to you doesn't know what they're talking about, and they're trying to sound smarter than they actually are. Which is not 100% of the time true, but it typically tends to be.
We should probably check if our
Yeah.
lecture is more than 20% French words.
Oh, it probably is, for sure. But yeah, I lost my train of thought. Give me a second. Words of French origin. Because French, there is no reason why words of French origin. We looked at this beautiful chart last time of words of French origin and English origin side by side, where you had words like fall of English origin and autumn of French origin. There is no reason why we should think that autumn is a more sophisticated word than fall is, other than the fact that we used to really, really like the French. At the same time, we also kind of hate the French, which is probably the reason why the Great Vowel Shift happened. If I'm being entirely honest, there were definitely other reasons that have influenced the Great Vowel Shift. Because again, nothing in history or linguistics happened for just one reason. For example, another notable thing that happened around the time was the Black Death, which made a lot of people move. And when people moved, the dialects started mixing. And so when a lot of people moved to the southeast of England, a lot of dialects came together in one place, which has also influenced the Great Vowel Shift. But even though that is one of the reasons, it's definitely not the main one. The main one is, of course, the Hundred Years' War. What do we have next? William
Yeah,
Shakespeare.
yeah.
We got William Shakespeare next. William Shakespeare was one of the first writers of modern English. In fact, because of how successful he was as a writer, people frequently define the beginning of modern English with Shakespeare. Because again, it's really difficult to define when one language ends and another language begins. Middle English and modern English are two different languages because two people speaking those two languages cannot understand each other without like a lot of translating power.
Yeah.
But we can understand Shakespeare, or at least we can try to. Do we have?
Yeah.
Yeah, we do.
So yeah. Muck your computer again. Oh, there we go. All right. Wow.
Yeah.
So yeah, Shakespeare. Why is he so influential? Why? What makes him so? Other than his like plots, what makes him so powerful? What makes him so relevant to modern English? It's the fact that, yeah, he was the first. He was one of the first early modern English authors. This isn't technically called modern English. It's called early modern because you can see that some of these words do seem a little off. This is an excerpt from *Midsummer Night's Dream*. It's his 1595 play, and so you might be familiar with this. And I think most of us can agree that, with a few exceptions, this does look like modern English, right? Most of these words already exist. Sure, there's the thous and thys and haves and I, but otherwise, sure, some of these are fancy, but most of you have probably seen most of these words, so maybe Maple. And yeah.
You can think
Most
of
important-
early modern English as a dialect. So if you imagine the British dialect, they speak the same language, but they sound a little bit weird to our ear,
So
right?
early modern English is kind of like a dialect.
Yeah, it's the same language, different dialect.
Yeah, and more importantly than the fact that it looks like modern language today, it sounds like all of these words are pronounced at least almost like what you pronounce them as today, which is why we use Shakespeare, because he's the earliest thing that's pronounced normally. It's the earliest that the poetry makes sense and everything rhymes. And other than that, what you might not know Shakespeare for is that he's responsible for the creation of over 1,700 English words. So let's compare. This is how early modern English looks, and this is how Middle English looks. Pretty big difference, right? Yeah. And so yeah, he created over 1,700 English words. This is some of my these are some of my favorites because I think they're the most surprising. Some of these are just variations of other words, like for example, bandit comes from band, but some of these are very unique. You would never expect something like hurry to be a word created by an author, right? Or I don't know, bump and cater. But yeah, no, these were brought in. They were brought in by Shakespeare into English.
He also authored a lot of phrases. For example, the phrase "knock knock" first appeared in Shakespeare.
Yeah, or off with his head. That's
Or
also
"in a
Shakespeare.
pickle,"
Yeah.
also Shakespeare.
As we used earlier in this lecture, actually, yeah. He also created a bunch of like hyphenated words. So, for example, cold-blooded, or do we have a green-eyed person here? Who has green eyes?
You have a really nice.
Green eyes. Green-eyed. Green-eyed, hunchbacked, self-abuse. All of those, they come from Shakespeare. And one of my favorite examples of Shakespeare bringing back words is the word weird. Who here has read Macbeth? It should be a lot of people because we were in high school. So for those of you who haven't, you're just the spoiler warning, but the play's been out for 400 years, so that's on you. But there's 3 witches that give Macbeth prophecy throughout the play, and they're called the Weird Sisters. Weird had disappeared out of the English language since the Norman invasion. It is an Anglo-Saxon word. Originally, it means something strange and magical and unusual. And Shakespeare single-handedly brought it back, and because of how, in the way he brought it back for it, pertaining to these witches, weird now means like, it has a negative connotation. If you're weird, you're like, I'm not very happy about that fact. It's kind of like, I think most of you have studied biology, right? In biology, there's something called the founder effect. It's when a huge population dies. Oh, yeah. It's when one person in the population goes out somewhere and starts a new population, and their genetics become the whole genetics. Same thing here. The old definition of weird died out, and because it's used in this context of witches, it became this new definition, with a negative connotation. So yeah, those are a bunch of new words. Yeah.
You have like a good,
good example.
Yeah, a good example of Shakespeare. Right. Remind me, which part of Midsummer is that from?
This is the climax. When well, have any of you here read or acted in Midsummer? Yeah.
Seen it, perhaps?
Seen it.
Uh,
Guys, come on, raise your hands. You've seen Midsummer Night's Dream. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Okay, if you have seen it, then this is the place where Hermia, the lover of Lysander, accuses the other main love interest in the play, Helena, of calling her short. So you can see, for example, puppet as in like a hand puppet. Hand puppet is small. And then she compares their statures, have made compare between our statures, and have urged her height with her tall personage. And yeah, this is just a fun passage, and it exemplifies the change of language
But
quite
you
well.
can understand most of it. Most of the modern English dialects have emerged out of early modern English. So we talked a couple lectures ago about the Scots language. Scots is a whole different language spoken in Scotland that has been influenced majorly by the Scottish Gaelic, but it's also a descendant of Old English. Old English has split, so we got our English lineage, and we also got Scots, which is on just a weird side quest of English. But most modern English dialects have all descended from here. That includes all the British dialects that exist, all the American dialects that exist, the Australian, the Canadian,
The Creoles.
all the Creoles that we have. A Creole, if you remember, is a language that emerged out of a pidgin. And a pidgin is when two people who speak different languages try to combine their languages so that they can understand each other. Creole is when that becomes into a language that somebody learns as a native language.
Yeah, it's like Jamaicans. For example, yeah, Jamaican Creole descends from this, as does our language, and yeah, that's where they split off.
If there was a team of linguists who have analyzed Shakespeare in every single English dialect, they analyzed how would Shakespeare sound in every single Shakespeare dialect, in every single English dialect, and you'll never be able to guess this. In which dialect Shakespeare sounds the best, where the rhymes make the most sense, and the pacing makes the most sense. It's not one of the British dialects. There is a common misconception that because English emerged in England, then the British dialect is the original English. That's not how languages worked. When the split happened into American English dialects and English dialects, when the split happened, both dialects have started emerging because both had sound changes, and as I've said, language changes inevitably. But there was some dialects that preserved themselves more than others, and the one that preserved themselves the most, as evident by analyzing Shakespeare, is the Southern American dialect. So what they speak in Alabama and Louisiana. If you ever hear a person with this thick Southern American dialect reading Shakespeare, you'll notice that it sounds a lot better than if it's somebody with a British dialect. A lot better subjective, but the rhymes are going to be better than with someone with a British dialect or with the general American dialect, which we usually speak over here. So if you want to put on the most accurate production of Shakespeare, find a bunch of Southern American people from Alabama and Louisiana and have them do it. It'll be the most accurate. We'll have 5 minutes left. Do you want to finish us off?
So yeah, Shakespeare, very much as we can see here, he acts as the best example. And this is where our lecture series kind of ends, in the year 1616, when Shakespeare dies at the age of 52. But through his life and works, Shakespeare really ties together every stage of linguistic evolution that we have tried our best to cover. Like all English texts, this, for example, monologue uses a base of Anglo-Saxon words, then combined with more complicated French and Latin words, all changed together through evolution of spelling and the Great Vowel Shift to sound like it does today and be spelled like it does today. And also, as it happens, Shakespeare wrote a lot about the many events and figures that we covered in our series of lectures. For example, he wrote his famous play Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar was, as some of you might remember, the first Roman to ever come in contact with Celtic England. Then he has Macbeth, who was around the same time as William the Conqueror, and who began a Norman conquest that brought all the French words into English. Then we have Shakespeare's Edward III, about the king who started the 100 Years' War and switched the Parliament to English. Then we have his two-part play, Henry IV, who was the first English king, as I said, to speak English after the Norman conquest. And finally, he has a play about the infamous Henry VIII, who would become the first English king to speak a form of English that most of us should be able to understand. And that is how the English language came to be. How through the influence of Anglo-Saxons and Normans and scholars and certain authors, the language in which we're delivering this lecture obtained the spelling, grammar, vocabulary, and pronunciation that we see today. We hope you guys enjoyed this series of lectures, and I personally hope that you have learned something funny or interesting from one of these lectures that you can tell other people about the history of the English language. And thank you so much for coming, especially those who came to all 4 lectures. And also, fun fact, this is the 112th anniversary of World War I today.
Wow.
Yeah, to end on a less fun note. Yeah.
If you have any questions,
Yeah.
feel free to ask them right
Yeah,
now.
feel free to go if you
Yeah.
want to, but if you have follow-up questions, feel free.
If you would like to make a donation, there is a donation
Oh,
donation over there. You can add one.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Those 4 rules of
Sound change. Yeah.
sound change. Who sets those rules? I mean,
They're more like
What-
guidelines.
what- what prevents everyone from just pronouncing input as input again over the next 100 years?
Are you
Just
asking?
out of nowhere.
So
are you asking why a change can happen another time?
I think he's more asking like why does input not impossible not go back to impossible? It's just like physics.
It could.
Yeah.
No, it definitely could do that. In fact, something might happen that a change might get reversed. A change that happened once might happen a second time later on, because sound change has no memory. When sound change happens, it's not because we're like, oh, I know that a longer time ago this change happened, so I can't undo it, or this already happened, so I can't do it again. We have no memory of that. So if it's gonna be convenient for us, it might totally happen again.
So it's not really rules, it's just more observations of how it changes.
I'll argue against that. Like, we record this lecture now, we put it online on YouTube, and we, I don't know, go crazy promoting it, and you know, for no reason other than, you know, piss people off, like people piss other people just start pronouncing input as input.
This has happened. Yeah.
For only reason, and the only reason is because, you know, the of this lecture and the other words undergoing this transition before.
This could happen. There's similar thing that happens with vocabulary. For example, I guess some of the people here may have been around for a time during the Soviet Union when they tried to remove French words, words of French influence, and something happened and that failed, as the Russian speakers might know.
But it succeeded in Turkey.
Yeah, but in Turkish, there used to be a bunch of Arabic words, but when Turkey became a nation state in the 1920s, they were like, let's get all the Arabic words out, and they did. And you can, like, a similar thing can happen to pronunciation. Really, linguistics it's kind of like statistics in the sense that it's all case-by-case basis, but if we bring it all together, these are the things that normally happen.
Okay, I'll ask it differently. Are there exceptions to those?
Are there exceptions to these rules? Almost certainly. There are none that I can think of off the top of my head.
Like impossible.
Okay, thank you. I got it.
Yeah.
I guess I had a similar question that how come there's a general perception, it seems, that there's like a regression to the mean that occurs in the language, in a sense, but how come we end up, in a lot of cases, starting with more complexity than we end up with over time in terms of what we say in specificity?
That's a great question, and that's because the converging to the mean that you described is one of the processes that happens. For example, with the vowels I described, when the unstressed vowels tend to converge all to the center, to the schwa, very frequently the opposite thing happens, where because if we start speaking, if we make all of our sounds very similar, it will be impossible to understand each other. So,
So-
we subconsciously think how. There are two questions that we constantly ask ourselves subconsciously. Is one, how can I make this as easy for me as possible to say? And the other one is, how can I make it as easy as possible for the other person to understand? We don't consciously ask them, but subconsciously this is what causes assimilation and dissimilation.
And it's how all language change works. We're just trying to get people to understand this.
When grammar changes, for example, if those of you who know Russian know that in Russian there is a lot of cases, there is different endings based on the gender or the animacy, whether something is animate or inanimate. English used to have that, and it lost it over time because it's easier or less complex. But something that's also true is that Old English, which used to have all those features, didn't always have them. For example, the ancestor language, the Proto-Indo-European language, didn't have them. They emerged recently, and they emerged for a similar reason why, for example, we have do and not combined into don't, right? This happened because that's easier to say. But as a result of that, we get this fun little nt suffix. And when enough of this happens, when enough of words fuse together to make them easier to say, you get a lot of very complicated suffixes that, for example, if you start attaching pronouns to words in the same way, like imagine a hypothetical where you have an adjective like I don't know, that's a bad one. Can't think of a good one. Oh, what's a good adjective?
He did.
He did. He did. And she did. Imagine if at some point these combine in order to make it easier to say into he did and she did. Imagine that. That will probably not happen because we don't have very convenient pronouns for that in our language. But if it did, then we would again get grammatical gender in English because we would have prefixes that signify gender. And that's the same exact mechanism that's happening here. We are already seeing English start to do this, and over time we'll get more complicated grammar because it's easier to speak. But then we'll get less complicated grammar at the expense of a more difficult language to speak.
So you never know. Eventually, Russian, моя твоя непонимаемая become standard.
Yeah.
And then it'll reverse again because you can't.
Yeah, it's a cycle of more complicated, less complicated.
So is it like a cycle that stays about the same, where we can infinitely have like a wave function where it stays about the same,
There
or is
is-
it a slow regression to the mean over time?
There is no such thing as a mean in a language. There is a theory called the typological morphology cycle theory that says that there exist three kinds of languages based on how the grammar works in that language. For example, you have languages like English, where we usually don't have a bunch of complicated endings or beginnings to words. They're just all separate. You have languages like Turkish, where you just take a bunch of different meanings, things, and smush them together into one word. And you have languages like Russian or Spanish, where the ending usually has a lot of very specific meaning. For example, in the Russian word begu, this ending u means that it's happening in present tense. I'm the one doing it, so it's singular, it's one person. All that information is one ending. So these are the three kinds of languages. And there's a theory that says that languages travel in a circle between those three kinds. But we've also found counterexamples of that. So even though we do think there is a wave pattern, as you've said, languages usually don't follow it.
Yeah, I think we call it there, just in case everybody
Yeah.
feels peer pressure to stay.
Yeah, if you have more questions, come up to us and we'll answer them.
Yep, thank you very much, guys. Yeah. Yeah, you can go.
Is Alec and Catherine? Is Alec Catherine American or
Yeah.
Around like halfway around
That was
the middle,
amazing.
and I-
Very like
If
actually.
you remember it, feel free to text
Very
me.
like like I don't even know how to, like, it was so like interesting where because you wrapped around that
Alec
whole
to Henry
concept,
B.
and it was just like you kind of
That's really
the way
rude.
you formatted it. I don't know.
I'm not mad at you. I didn't know that.
It was like better than
Attention.
it
When I was writing this, I
Like have an ollie jolly Christmas.
and like putting it on like sort of looks like Alec.
Thank you, by the way.
What?
So why didn't you?
There was a thing you said. What was the thing that I just remember? Then Vanya just said it instantly.
Oh, guidelines.
Yeah.
They're more like guidelines.
Yeah.
They're more like.
I whispered to them, like, they're more like guidelines.
Yeah,
They're more
They're
like
more like
guidelines. Yeah.
Мускулатура.
Very good lecture. However,
Насколько точно хочется выражаться, насколько лениво выражаться точно.
yes, spoke to Google and rambled a bit, so I had a good time. Yeah, but you
Or are we getting food? Is the question we should get food?
in this pose.
Walk somewhere.
What's this?
I don't know. I just remember being in that pose.
I would.
Oh, yes, that was
He was because he's never heard the election.
More putting things on the slide than writing, because I can't do
It
that.
was really funny when I first saw that. I'm like, what word is that?
Девчонки, стулья. Да. Девчонки, в пиджаках особенно. Стулья. Вот туда.
No, I don't know.
You guys,
Find out.
you guys all help.
Yeah, can you guys stop being automatic?
Wait, I can't move it while it's dries.
Alright.
Convenient.
Cool.
Guys, you are farming with 2 chairs.
I'm not bored for this.
No, but you didn't run it back and grab it. You're behind me, so you weren't Orifar.
Yeah. Sasha.
Yeah, we already did that joke, by the way.
Мы знакомы or whatever.
Gosh, there seems to be a little issue.
What happened? That's me, alright.
Corners are cut off.
Reference to Rebels actually.
Okay, well the recording is still running. God bless.
That's it all right or whatever.
Hit the start button.
Yeah, I hit the start. I was really scared.